All right, so our next speaker is Mike Archer. He's the State Lakes Coordinator for Department of Environment and Energy, received a bachelor's degree in biology from University of Nebraska-Kearney and master's in aquatic ecology from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He's going to talk about harmful algal blooms in Nebraska.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity. So I know nothing about groundwater, so I don't even pretend to know anything about groundwater, but I do know a little bit about surface water. So that's what we're going to switch focus a little bit and talk about that. And we'll kind of get into why it's important to address it at this point in time. So anyway, like I said, the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy runs a public beach monitoring program here in Nebraska, and we have since about 2004. We have really probably what's one of the most robust beach monitoring programs in the nation. And I should point out that all of these pictures are from Nebraska, and most of them are from this year, actually. So anyway, we monitor 51 lakes. That consists of 54 beaches. We sample those weekly. We start May 1st and run through up through last week, actually, September 30th. We look at two human health parameters specifically. We're looking at E. coli bacteria and the toxin, the harmful algal bloom toxin microsystem. And I'll kind of break that down here in a second, what that is. But basically what we do is we need help. We're a small group of folks. Sorry. Maybe I can do this. Does that help? Is that a little better? We're a small group of folks, so we have to have help. And fortunately, we have a lot of great partners out in the state that are willing to help us. NRDs are invaluable to us. They do a good run of the work for us in collecting these samples. And they'll go out on Mondays and Tuesdays, collect these samples. We give them the materials and things that they need to take care of the bacteria analysis within their office. And they ship us off those microcystin samples for analysis in our lab. But basically, a process repeats itself every Monday, right? We've got people out there collecting samples. You know, like Marty said, as an agency, we take a lot of samples. This program alone each year will take almost 3,000 samples. So it's a lot. But what are we talking about? And this does get a little complicated, but basically we're talking about cyanobacteria, right? It's a naturally occurring organisms. You know, it's thought that they were responsible for oxygenating early Earth. It's also thought that their ability to photosynthesize evolved into other plants and into the green that's photosynthesizing today. Sorry. And you know, in a lake, they're needed. You know, we can talk about how bad they are, and we will eventually here, but they're needed. They're a crucial part. They're the base of that food web, you know, within a lake, within a water system. So they are needed. But as we've been talking about with nitrates and everything else coming along, they become a problem. You know, when you give them what's called eutrophication, basically when you give them too many nitrogen or too many nutrients, that nitrogen and the phosphorus, they start to bloom and they start to take over everything. They kind of get out of control. And you know, these are some examples of ways that we do introduce too many nitrogen or too many nutrients along the way. You know, you add in sunshine, which we really can't control, and warmer water temperatures, and these things kind of take over, and they go from this harmless cyanobacteria to a harmful algal bloom. Comes by a lot of names. Blue-green algae is very common. Toxic algae, you know, the kind of the nomenclature we prefer to use is the harmful algal bloom because they're not always bad. But when they start looking like that, or like this under the microscope, that is bad. It is important to realize, though, it's not an algae. It is actually a bacteria. Its cell structure is similar to bacteria. It just has the ability to photosynthesize. There's about 2,000 different species of cyanobacteria, of which about 46 of those have the ability to produce a toxin. These are some of these that we found here in the state this year. Microcystis, Glycospermum, and Famozamenon, which just has the best name of all of them. Everyone's singing that song now, I know they are. But you know, these are some of the more common ones that we see in the state, and these are all All of these have the ability to produce a toxin. So when we start talking about the toxins, it's kind of important. We don't sample for algae, right? We sample for the toxin that's produced by algae. And we actually sample for microcystin, which is the most common toxin produced. We find it all over. Lots of different species will produce this toxin. It's fairly simple to analyze for, and so that's the one we do. So why is it bad? Well, for us as humans, if we ingest it, it's a hepatotoxin, so it leads to liver damage. What we more commonly see, because we are blessed in Nebraska in that most of our drinking water comes from the ground, right? People in Toledo don't have that option. They're getting theirs out of the lake, and so they are dealing with these sorts of issues in their drinking water. We're not. Where we'll see most of the issues is the skin irritant. If they do ingest it, you end up with what they call flu-like symptoms that we're all familiar with. And for pets, if they ingest it, it's usually more than likely fatal for them, unfortunately. And those things always bring about the news. This summer, we were inundated with news media calling us because 2 dogs in South Carolina had gotten into a lake and had died from toxic algae. So people love pets, people love dogs, and unfortunately these two don't mix real well. But there's other toxins produced. UNL, Dr. Hoagland had done some research on these 2 other toxins, BMAA and DABA, and their research had shown that there's a pretty heavy overlap or co-occurrence of these toxins. They followed us around and they found, where we were finding microcystin, they were finding these others. And these others come with some pretty heavy-hitting diseases, things that we really don't want to mess with and don't want to hear about. But it is something to keep on the radar. And the other one that's pretty easily monitored, we don't, but a lot of other states do, is Slinters spermopsin. It's toxic to liver, kidney, spleen. All of the important things that are inside of you tend to keep you upright and moving forward. And anatoxin A is also fairly common occurrence, a neurotoxin, as well as saxitoxin, and that's more, you hear more of that along the lines of seafood, paralytic shellfish poisoning, right? So why does it matter? Well, for the past 15 years, since we've started this program, us as an agency have used the World Health Organization's microcystin standard of 20 parts per billion, okay? 5 or 6 years ago, EPA decided that they should maybe look at this, because no one really had, look at this and try to decide if 20 parts per billion is an appropriate level for health safety. They've put out a call for papers, research, so on and so forth, and spent the years since trying to develop a number that maybe is the most appropriate for human health. And this, in May, unfortunately, after we had already started our sampling season, they issued the number of 8 parts per billion for microcystin. Now that should be pointed out, that is recreation criteria, right? That's not a drinking water. There's a separate drinking water criteria that does apply. But like I said, we're pretty lucky in Nebraska that very few people get their drinking water from a lake. There's a few north of us here at Cedar Knox and a few others, but we're pretty lucky in that most of us in Nebraska are dealing with this recreation criteria where we're not intentionally ingesting it. But it's a pretty significant change, 20 to 8, and it's going to have a lot of effect on a lot of people, NRDs and cities and people that depend on those tourist dollars. It's important. So we did look at it, and we rode along with the EPA on this to try to make sure that this is an appropriate number. And looking at what they did, they did use the best available research that was out there. It's still new, but they're using what's there. And the big thing they did was who's most likely to ingest water, right? I mean, this little guy is going to be way more likely to ingest water at a lake than this guy. And as an agency, we have, for 15 years now, have used that before anybody else, before they even developed this criteria. We went and said, okay, well, if you're at a lake, who's the one that's going to eat, who's going to drink the water? Who's the one that's going to be most likely? And that's kids. And our sampling regimen, reflects that, where we wade out to that 2 or 3 foot depth and we get a sample from that depth where children's faces are, where they're going to be swimming and taking that water in. So it's also based on body weight, so who's most likely to ingest it and what do they weigh? Well, I mean, that's fairly obvious, right? Kids weigh less than me for sure. How much are they likely to ingest? And this, keep in mind, this is at the beach, right? How much are they likely to ingest by recreating around that beach? How long are they going to spend time there? And what type of exposure they're going to have? Swimming obviously is the most common, but there's others. Wading, like I said, that microcystin is a skin toxin. And we'll get that call fairly often of people that were out fishing, not wearing waders, and then their legs break out in a rash, or they were swimming and they're getting it in their ears and they're getting an ear infection or sinus infection. Those things happen. Obviously kayaking is less, but one that I'm curious about as we move through into the future and future research is jet skiing, because basically you're aerosolizing those toxins. You just blast them up in the air and turn them into an aerosol can. So, and breathing it in. So I'm curious to see where that goes. But all these things were taken into account when they established that number. So where does that leave us in Nebraska? That leaves us, sorry, check it for time. That leaves us with this. And I hate messy slides, and this is an incredibly messy slide. But my point is that for the most part, this red line is 8 parts per billion. This is the average microcystin concentration of every lake that we monitor for microcystin over the last 10 years. For the most part, we're okay, right? Not going to be a big deal. Lakes we're going to have issues at times, but for the most part, we've only got, and this isn't a surprise to people that work around these lakes or that work in these lakes, there's no shock there. But for the most part, we're going to be okay. Oops, sorry. But broken down a little bit, these are kind of the lakes that we've always continually had problems with, and this is the average microcystin concentration by month over the last 10 years. So for the last 10 years of May, last 10 years of June, July, so on and so forth. And as you can see, that 8 is going to play a part in some of these lakes, right? There is going to be more health advisories issued at these lakes, or more frequently anyway. And then kind of looking at this from a different perspective, maybe as the average number of times that it exceeded 8 by month over the last 10 years, right? And so, you're looking maybe at that one number. There's going to be some lakes that have problems, and those are discussions that we're going to have moving forward. Looking at this, out of the 51 lakes we monitor, over 10 years, 31 of them had exceeded 8 parts per billion. So this stuff's going to come to your front door at some point in time, right? It may not be every year, it may not be every week of every month, but it's going to happen, and the news cycle is going to increase and continue on these things. And just kind of breaking that messy graph down again, these lakes probably aren't a shock to people that work around them, like I said, but it's a significant number. And it's going to have an effect on communities that are around these lakes and NRDs that manage these lakes and recreate these lakes and game and parks and others that manage them. So how does this look, as far as breaking it down? I guess, we know the changes coming, but looking at it as a whole, does it mean that the problem is increasing, so on and so forth? So just a quick graph of looking at the average microcystin concentration by year. There's some variability, but it's fairly easy to attribute that as much to weather patterns as anything. We know nutrients are a problem, right? We're going to hear that over and over and over again. We know it's a problem. Whether it's in your groundwater or the surface water, we know it's a problem. Lakes aren't immune to that, right? And then, kind of the same graph, but broken down by month. And that's just again, remember, this is a microcystin is a reflection of water temperature, nutrient availability, and sunshine. So, it's no shock that as the summer moves on, you start seeing these higher levels of microcystin because the water's warmer and there's more sunshine. So, like I said, this is going to affect NRDs. It's going to affect communities. This is going to affect people because recreation dollars are huge. So we found, it's going to be important that a message gets out there that this isn't all bad and we can work through this. So accurate universal information is really crucial. We've developed, working with our partners at Game and Parks, NRDs, so on and so forth, to come up with some universal signage that's able to be posted at these lakes. You know, if everything is fine, this is a bifold sign. So if everything's fine, this sign is flipped up, it's blue. It provides information on where to get information. You know, go to our website, use our phone number, so on and so forth, to find information about the monitoring that goes on at that lake. If it does happen to exceed 8 parts per billion, then this sign will be flipped down and the orange will be displayed, warning people that they should avoid contact with the water. You know, and there's handy little symbols on there. It's in English and Spanish. You know, and we really tried to make the point that the park isn't closed, the lake isn't closed. We just don't want you in the water. Do all the things that are available to you. You know, picnic, camp, fish, so on and so forth. Just don't swim, and certainly don't drink it. Our website is updated every single week. Thursday night, usually we have that updated and ready to go. Links on the sign, you know, email. If you go to our webpage, it's the top banner on our webpage, you know, May 1st through September 30th. We do also have a weekly email that's sent out at the same time this is updated. There's instructions on the bottom of our webpage on how to sign up for it. We try to keep people up to date. And we do that on Thursday so people can have that information before the weekend. So if they want to head out to Branched Oak Lake, they can get on there Friday morning and say, okay, well, we're good, we can go. Or we have to decide where else to go. EPA website has a lot of great information. And social media, you know, it's huge. It is the era we live in. You know, as an agency, we've got a great PIO department that's taking that task on and trying to get the right information out. And NRDs are doing a really good job too. NEMA High NRD is they're great. They're very proactive. They've got lakes that are a problem. And they know that, but they also want to make sure that people have the information they need. So they're very proactive about getting that information out there immediately and right away. And then we're always available, right? And give us a call. We'd be happy to talk to anybody. If the questions come to you and you're not sure, just give us a call and we'll be happy to